Aloha, nerds. Isn't it nice to get out and take a walk? Just walk around the old neighborhood. God, this fucking neighborhood's not safe. Shit. Oh, Jesus. Whoa. It is crazy out there. Aloha, nerds, and welcome back to the TheSalawag's White's Great Gut Reaction. I watch things and I react from the gut. I really just wanted to talk today about the movie Meteor Man, because that's an incredible movie. And, Jesus, though, I did not expect to run into gang violence. And from the looks like it, it's illegal aliens. Ugh, stupid sanctuary cities. Anyway, Meteor Man. I really wanted to talk to you today about the movie Meteor Man, written and directed by Robert Townsend. Dang, this is a movie I saw way back when I was a little kid. I was, playing with Beast Wars toys and shit. And it sounds so bad up there. I want to look, but I just don't want to see it. But yeah. Man, I love superhero movies. I love superheroes growing up as a kid. There's just something about it that I can't explain, but the fantasy of being stronger than anything on Earth, or being able to fly, or any of that, it's amazing. And I love superheroes. I grew up on the 90s cartoons. I was a 90s kid. I grew up on the Spider-Man, Batman, Hulk, you name it. If it was a superhero and it was an animated show that came out in the 90s, I probably watched it. So that led me to the movies as well. I wanted to see superheroes in live action. I mean, I think every kid wants to see the thing done for real, for real. It's great to see it animated. But man, to see it actually happen is the ultimate suspension of disbelief that you could ever wish for. And so, as a kid, I love superhero movies, and I would watch anything that was a superhero movie, essentially. So, Meteor Man was one of the ones I saw as a kid. I grew up with Meteor Man, Blank Man, Steel. We didn't have that many superhero movies back then, so it was really, either you're going to watch Batman and Batman Returns, and maybe Batman Forever. But, you can't watch those all the time. You can't watch that all the time if it's only one character. So it was awesome to be able to turn to, in my case, I love Blank Man the most. And I came upon Meteor Man a little later in my childhood. I think late enough to see it as a bit goofy. It's a bit goofy. It's a bit dated. Robert Townsend, this was his third feature film. Nothing that I would be aware of. But there was something great about it that was unmistakable even as a kid. There were some powerful scenes that I felt, even though I had no sense of really the concept, Like there's this amazing scene where Meteor Man, who is basically like Superman, except he draws his powers from a meteor. He was a regular guy hit by a meteor, and the meteor gave him these supernatural gifts that are mostly like Superman's powers. But there's this amazing scene where you see all the gangsters are, this is like a rough neighborhood, so all the gangsters are shooting at the cops. The cops are shooting at the gangsters. It's a huge shootout. And Meteor Man floats down and raises his hands up and says, "No, stop." And he essentially gets both sides to stop shooting each other. And I just thought, wow, that's nuts. That is really crazy. Just to think as a kid, I would be hearing about gang violence later in my life, but it was not something I had to worry about. My family pretty much kept me inside. We may have lived in a rougher neighborhood when I was a younger kid, but then we moved to a nicer neighborhood, a little later in my childhood. But I would hear about gang violence later on. But even as a kid, there was something sort of special being said when I saw that scene. That, this superhero, who normally in the cartoons, superheroes are fighting supervillains that match their strength, and it's very exhilarating, and it's cool, and it justifies the superhero being there to stop a villain like that. But here was a movie where the superhero was doing something truly no normal person would do, which is step in the line of fire between two enemies, essentially an urban war zone between police and gangsters. And he's stepping in between, taking all the hits so that everyone else can sort of run out of ammunition and, sort of take the time to breathe and stop fighting. Essentially, he asked for them to stop fighting and to talk it out. Now, this is still a bit cheesy, it's still a bit cheesy. This movie is cheese, and mind you, it's this man's third feature film. He had made Eddie Murphy Raw before this, and had done, I think, another documentary and a music video. But this was his third movie, so it's a bit cheesy, it kind of, some of this stuff doesn't last quite as long, but it's okay, the message is so clear. Here's a superhero doing something very different that most superheroes, even in the best superhero media, aren't doing. Most superheroes are more akin to Star Wars, where it's about self-discovery and dealing with whatever your personal issue is so that you can grow up and become your true, most efficient, functional self. Really, that's all a superhero is. It is just the coming of age of a person to be one's best self. And that being one's best self, most focused, healthy, whatever it may be, that the person needs to change to, is ultimately what makes you a super person. But here is a superhero who is actually getting involved with society's issues and sort of taking a stand and saying, and not really picking a side. I think what's interesting about this movie is that Jefferson Reed, who is Robert Townsend, plays the main character, Meteor Man, whose regular identity is Jefferson Reed, a school teacher in a sort of rougher neighborhood. It's a nice enough neighborhood, but it's adjacent enough to some of the rougher parts. And so there's gangsters running around, crimes happening. But he's a school teacher. And essentially the movie is starting off with him getting in trouble for telling kids to run away and not get involved with fights or anything like that, which is kind of understandable. And you see Jefferson Reed wears all white, so in many ways it's like he's innocent, he's untouched, he has not been in a fight or tested in any kind of way. He himself, there's a level of innocence to him. But there's one night where he encounters the main gang of this particular territory, this particular turf, belongs to the Gold Lords or something like that. I just watched it, but I'm still... some of the details are a little funky. What I mainly remember are the Baby Lords, which are, adolescent gangsters, which is terrifying enough. Jefferson Reed encounters the gang, and they try and get him for helping out a woman who's being attacked by one of these Baby Lords. And after escaping the gang, that's when this mysterious meteorite strikes him, and he becomes imbued with first he gets torturously burned, and is left with third-degree burns, to which he goes to the hospital, which is very frightening and haunting. This movie almost feels like Michael Jackson's Thriller, where it goes through all this range of genre within the movie. If the movie goes in a certain genre direction, it commits to that genre direction and does it, which is admirable but mistaken. No, it's awesome. It's awesome for the most part. It really serves the movie well for the most part. But there are a few places where this movie should have not committed and should have made a deleted scene. But on the whole, I think, the fact that you're starting out with this guy who's telling kids to run away from fights, and he himself does not engage in fights and doesn't try to really get involved in his community. This community is really struggling under the grip of these gang wars and this gang violence. And you see the community having like a small town hall where they're trying to set up a group who will go out and patrol and help make sure that if people get in trouble, there's someone to call and get help, a sort of super neighborhood watch. And this is all happening while Jefferson Reed is telling kids to run away from violence and just stay in school and all this very, positive but passive stuff. And you see this, the staff, including the principal, are telling him, like, what's wrong with you, man? Like, you got to learn to stick up for yourself and all this stuff. And that's sort of this guy's journey. He has a real human journey on the road to becoming, in his own way, he's kind of an adolescent. So on his way to becoming a man in the eyes of others, but in the eyes of himself as well. And so when he gets burned and tortured after being chased, knowing that he would be killed by the gang if they saw him because he witnessed one of their crimes. The amount of suffering that he goes through to then get the powers, and then the tone shifts again into this more Superman the movie type movie, in which the gang is trying to kill him, and he keeps surviving because of his miraculous abilities. So he's invincible, and he's super fast and super strong, and and he discovers so many of his powers all at once because there's an attack on his father, and he stops the attack on his father, and all of his powers come out as he's chucking the Gold Lords away. And what an ensemble cast, by the way. There's a lot of great names in this movie that I just got to shout out to. First of all, you've got Eddie Griffin, who plays the best friend. And then Eddie Griffin, by the way, I think shows some good range in this movie, where everything that Jefferson Reed goes through, Eddie Griffin has to sort of react to and be a person to. When Jefferson Reed is in the hospital, you see Eddie Griffin he looks beat up. He's not crying his eyes out or nothing, but you really like, oh man, he feels for his friend. There's a good quality throughout this movie where I feel like Eddie Griffin has some, even though the material's kind of goofy, he has some like legitimate performances. It just makes you go, hey, you probably could have do something a little more serious, like holy crap. I know Eddie Griffin from mostly late 90s, 2000s, where he was playing either the funny side guy or undercover brother or something like that. And that's really the only way I know him. But seeing him in this role, I was like, wow, he kind of, I mean, it's almost accidental. I mean, the movie's trying to be a movie, but he is the sidekick character. But some of his reactions and just tiny moments of performance made me think, dang, this dude, maybe has a little bit more going on here than just being the funny reaction guy. And I think everyone kind of has. There's such a great cast. Everyone kind of has the real quality to them, and even if the situation's ridiculous, their reaction matches how ridiculous what they're seeing is, which is nice. There's so many movies where that reaction is not achieved, but in Meteor Man, when they gun him down Godfather style, when the Gold Lords try to gun down Meteor Man before he's Meteor Man, but while he has his powers, he's just walking across the street and they gun him down Godfather style. Epic squibs all over the place, dust, explosions bursting behind him. It's amazing. It's genuinely amazing. And again, committing to this Godfather sequence where you believe, oh man, I am watching this guy die for the second time in this movie. But it's gunned down Godfather style. And he falls over and then he gets back up. And everyone freaks out because he has no wounds, but his clothes are all torn up. And dang, it's amazing how seeing even their reactions, like just the sheer shock of it. Um, yeah, perhaps most people would just be quietly shocked as they are in most superhero movies, but in this movie, like they really react like I just saw something completely unbelievable happen. And when he not only is invincible, but they try and chase him down after he survives the Godfather gun down. They try and chase him down and run him over with the car. And Robert Townsend leaps and jumps all the way up uh, to this light pole. He's hanging on to the light itself. He's like just holding on to this thing. I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Like, not only is he holding on to the light pole, but he overhears a couple talking in the apartment right next to the where the light pole is sort of hanging. And so he looks up and he sees this beautiful woman in her underwear, essentially. And the woman is looking in a mirror, and in the mirror she sees him. And they look at each other, and she freaks out. And then the boyfriend comes out, and he's got a bat, and it's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get you." And he's like, "No, I'm not a peeping Tom." And he's only there because he jumped and leapt out of the way and miraculously dodging a car that was trying to run him over. So you kind of have this kind of funny hijinks kind of movie going on here. Um, and quite a love of cinema, even though this is only his third film, and Robert Townsend talked about not going to film school before making this movie, which was fine. You don't have to. Like Tarantino said, you don't have to go to film school. You don't have to do it. If you love movies, you'll make something good. That was a wonderful thing he said, and it's true. But damn, that to me is what Meteor Man is in so many instances. There's such a huge chunk of this movie. I would say about 3/4 of this movie are so great as a superhero movie because of all the different things that it does. Because it stays different and stays kind of real. And all these incidences where he uses his superpowers, there's witnesses everywhere. Everyone in the neighborhood knows that he's the guy doing this because all of these attacks are completely in public in the daylight. And so, he tries to keep it a secret, but there's no way to keep it a secret. Everybody knows. And all these kind of things that would happen if you really had these superpowers, you wouldn't be able to control hiding it, because inevitably a situation is going to happen that would expose you, and that's exactly what happens in this movie, because he's exposed right away. James Earl Jones is one of the witnesses to his abilities, and he's one of the people in this community watch that's trying to form some kind of watch to protect the neighborhood. But because of the discovery of his powers, now the community watch wants him to be the watchman, to be the guy protecting the neighborhood. And it's crazy how fast things happen, but also there's something sort of real about that, Essentially, this neighborhood watch was struggling to hold itself together in the first place. But then as soon as the superhero shows up, they decide to give him all the responsibility right off the bat. But he's kind of happy to do it as well because he knows he's invincible in all of this. But this movie is kind of about the consequences of choosing that and being picked to be the guy who deals with other people's problems. There's a lot going on in this movie that's multi-layered and really genuinely interesting and really about people themselves. I think that's what elevates this movie above so many. And I'm talking about 95% of superhero movies. What elevates Meteor Man over the rest of them is this consciousness about how people are as people. People aren't perfect. People aren't always perfect victims who just need help. Sometimes people should do things themselves. Sometimes people need to get off their ass and fight for themselves, but they are afraid to. And that's what this society is gripping with, that this neighborhood is gripping with the terror of this militarized, streamlined, very organized gang that's taking over their neighborhood, the Gold Lords. Don Cheadle, War Machine, Hotel Rwanda, is one of these gold lords. And it's crazy to say, like, hey, it's you. It's you. I don't know if we knew your name then, but dang, we definitely knew your name later. So it's just awesome that we have this movie that identifies a local problem, identifies a problem in society, but also identifies there's another problem that society's kind of scared to take on its own problems, whatever the problems may be, and it's not presented as a specifically only black problem. I think what's cool is they just talk about it as the neighborhood. Because there are Latin neighborhoods with Latin gangs, Asian neighborhoods with Asian gangs, white neighborhoods with white gangs. Every race has a gang. Every race has crooks and good people. And the problem with this movie is that the good people give up very quickly. And it's only Jefferson Reed's parents who are standing up. Everyone else is too scared to stand up to the gang. That's why Jefferson Reed's parents are the victims or near victims before he gets these abilities and becomes Meteor Man. The fear is the ones who fight will be hurt, but then if the ones who fight are only one, of course they'll be squashed. But if the entire neighborhood themselves are bigger than this gang, and that's kind of a visual point made later on in the movies. Like this neighborhood's bigger than the number of gang members that there are, and yet they're gripped with fear because a lot of these gang members are younger, stronger people, but the sheer number of the neighborhood, even with sticks and stones, could whoop their asses. Except the gangs have guns, so scared. But that's what this movie's about, and Robert Townsend talks about the real point of this movie being not about being a superhero movie, but about having courage within yourself. Um, do you have courage to face your issues and to face whatever whatever your concern may be? Do you have the courage to stand up and deal with it? Which is really powerful because at a certain point in the movie, he loses his powers, and he has no choice but to face the gang down as himself again without the super suit. He gets the super suit. There's a great there's a great little arc where he can fly, but he's afraid of heights. So early on in his days of flight, he's flying only 4 feet off the ground. There's a moment where after they finally nail the suit, how his suit should look, which, if this suit was brought up to today's standards, I think, it would be great today. It's an okay looking suit for the time, but it's definitely ahead of the time for a lot of superhero suits uh, that would come because of the design, the aesthetic design of this suit. Very modern. It's just the materials that are a bit behind. Um, but damn, this is a really good movie in terms of its themes and its character's arc. Even the even being afraid of heights just elevates the movie. Is like, I mean, if you were a real person, you'd be afraid of heights too, and probably it would take you a montage to be willing to fly higher than that, which is also kind of symbolic as well. That's kind of a symbolic journey that the character is going on because he starts out being the guy who tells kids to run from violence. He ran from violence, and essentially the superpowers forced him to confront it. And by the time he has no powers again later on in the movie, he confronts it without the powers and without fear. All of a sudden he realizes what really matters is taking care of what's right in front of you. And that is what the movie's really about. That's something that Robert Townsend talked about in an interview, is that the movie is about the courage that's in your own heart. Some of the background of this movie is, and Robert Townsend, is that when he started directing movies, part of why he did it was because he was sick of auditioning for roles as slaves, pimps, and gangbangers. He was like, I can't believe this is all Hollywood has to offer. Is all is these roles. He was auditioning for a role, and this English director was telling him he wasn't acting black enough or he wasn't acting gangster enough, and he was like, but I come from a real neighborhood where this really happens, and that's not like that. And the English guy was just not pleased. And so this was a motivational factor that he would start making pictures that presented a different kind of black male. He's like, and certainly if you see him talk, like he's, he tells his history that he comes from a rougher part of Chicago, but he himself is not like that. And you can see that that's, how Jefferson Reed, Meteor Man, is dressed and behaves is how he behaves. It's himself. It's much like what Stan Lee did with all of his characters, is that he imbued this main character with his own fears and problems. One thing that I really liked that Robert Townsend said was that when he was a kid, living in a rougher part of town, he really didn't want to get involved in anything, and neither did his parents. So he just sat at home and watched TV all day, and he would act out everything for his mom when his mom got home from work. And not only that, but the neighborhood would kind of know him as the TV guy, and so he would just act things out and tell people where the good channels were and what the good shows were around his neighborhood. And so, that right there, from a young age, he was keeping his own self away from the life, but with entertainment, and even just entertaining people as they live their lives, which is kind of a wonderful thing. So I just think, man, it's like, I really appreciate this movie for its willingness to go there. And definitely because of this movie, seeing it at a young age, it kind of became a sort of, not a benchmark that would be for society, but a marker for me to identify when a superhero movie is truly doing what it's supposed to do. And frankly, I think no superhero movie has tried to tackle society in any kind of honest, earnest way, with the exception of, I would say, the first Spider-Man to an extent, because it follows Stan Lee's comic, which is about, sort of how crime happens, consequences of crime, and your role, should something happen, your role in how things play out. But more specifically, Meteor Man is saying, if you are in these situations and you do nothing, like his character does, then you're allowing it to happen. But he doesn't just call out anything by race. He just calls out the people of the neighborhood, because when he has no powers, the neighborhood is too afraid. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this movie, go see the movie, but it's many years old, so I'm spoiling it. But when he has no powers, the neighborhood essentially votes him out of the neighborhood and tells him to leave. And then the gang is waiting for him out in the streets when he's going to leave, and the whole neighborhood just hides. And the filmmaking then turns into this kind of Unforgiven or Man with No Name kind of building sequence of Robert Townsend walking out, and you seeing him pass open doorways where he doesn't see anyone inside, but inside the door is one of his neighbors just sort of looking out and seeing him, and then kind of hiding in the darkness, just waiting for it to be over. And it's this really sad Western genre type of sequence, but it's so good. I mean, stuff like that's really juicy and makes a movie have a sense of drama and have a sense of consequences. He could potentially die because he has no abilities, and no one is going to stand up for him, even though as Meteor Man for a whole 45 minutes or 2 weeks or 3 months or whatever it is, he was saving everyone and protecting everyone and changing the neighborhood. So it's something to say about how fickle people can be when they depend on someone or are inspired by someone or something like that. But as soon as that person stops being able to provide that for them, all of a sudden you don't need that person anymore. But then, despite that, he still goes out and faces the gang without his powers. And that's powerful. That is incredibly powerful. And to say that this is a superhero movie, but the climax is about a guy not having his powers anymore, and just having to be the person that he was, and having that be enough. You know what I mean? And just the sense of identity is laid in there as well, where Sinbad is in this movie, and Sinbad is playing a guy who's kind of like Robert Townsend, but who, he's black as well, but he's really trying to be black, and it's such a weird SNL thing to have in this movie. This movie has a handful of SNL skit moments, which are very bizarre, and only in the end of the movie are they bad, because I'll get to that too. But essentially, this movie is just layered with the sense of finding your true self and not trying to be something else, and standing up for that. This just very simple kind of movie that's simply standing up for yourself and for your neighbor, even if they wouldn't thank you for it. Just doing the right thing because it's the right thing is the most important aspect of this movie. That is powerful. That is what a superhero movie is supposed to be. A true kid's parable, a true kid's story. A superhero movie is simply an urban fairy tale. You're blessed with magical abilities that don't necessarily relate to the gods or science, but sometimes both. But what matters is what you choose to do as a person. The powers don't make you a superhero. It's that choice. When the powers aren't there for you, are you still going to be the good person? And that's the question of what every superhero movie, what Spider-Man asks, that for sure. Spider-Man's all about that. He had the power to stop the guy who gunned down Ben, his uncle, but he didn't use him. He didn't think it mattered. But this is a case where a guy didn't know he had that power. He didn't know he was strong until he got out there a little bit, and then ultimately had no choice but to be strong. And when he was backed in that corner, he realized he's willing to fight. He has it in him. So that's the journey of this character. It's a superhero journey, but it's also layered with societal reflections and interpersonal reflection. What you see yourself as and what you're going to do. Damn, And I think those parts make this movie great. But on the whole, it's a bit dated, and the 1/4 of the movie that is bad is the thing that holds this movie back. Because 75% of this movie, I'm just like, this is so great. Why don't people talk about it? And then at the end, there's some SNL crap that happens, like Robert Townsend, you goofy guy, you goofy mofo, man. You do some goofy stuff in that final battle that really made me go, no, this is why this movie is not talked about anymore, because you do pretty much everything right, and then like this goofy dance scene happens. Spoiler territory again. Early on in the movie, when Meteor Man first learns about his powers, he discovers that when he touches books, he can absorb the knowledge of the books for at least 30 seconds, and he can know and practice anything that was in the book for that 30 seconds. And, it's kind of a cute little setup. You kind of know it's going to come back. It's just kind of one of those hanging setups. It's one of those things that I really wish they had just played with more at the time and did not need to come back later, unless it really, really had a clever usage. Because ultimately what happens is, this movie does try to let you have your cake and eat it too, where, at the end of the movie, when he has no powers and he's facing off the gang, the whole gang is about to gun him down. And Bill Cosby, who is playing a homeless man who just has a few little awesome scenes, you know. He steps in, and mind you, at the time, we don't know about any of the stuff that's gone on, so I'm just going to speak at it from that perspective. At the time, it was really wonderful to see Bill Cosby, and there's something about it that's still kind of charming and wonderful here in this movie, but I am just going to skip over what we already know. If you already know it, you already know it. I'm not talking about it in this video. Okay? That's that. So he has a marvelous few little scenes where he's using some of the abilities of Meteor Man, and it's because he actually has the last piece of the meteor, which was not absorbed into Meteor Man when it hit him. And he's really just like rubbing the thing. It's like an egg of energy, and he just rubs the meteor to use his powers. But then the little meteorite gets knocked out of his hands, and both the bad guy and Meteor Man touch the rock at the same time, and they both get the powers. And one of the first things that happens is that Meteor Man touches a book, and the book gives him kung fu abilities from Bruce Lee. And so now we enter an SNL skit moment of Meteor Man using Bruce Lee kung fu to get out of the situation. So that is something that happens in the movie. But that's not that bad. That's really a survivable gag that would have been fine as an end movie, haha, payoff gag. But then what happens next is really the crime of the movie, because all of a sudden, the next book he picks up is a modeling book, and he tosses it over to the bad guy, who catches it perfectly and then absorbs the knowledge. And then they both go into a modeling dance-off like Zoolander, and they pull off their jackets, and I'm just like, no. Like, on the one hand, yes, this is hilarious. It's hilarious. But not right now. We don't need this scene right now. It really pulls the rug out from under the entire movie, because the movie really is phenomenal. I really wish this had been a gag that was earlier in the movie. And these are just mini gripes. It doesn't really hold back the movie, but it does hold back the experience of the movie, because the movie is still great in terms of everything I described before. But the sheer experience is pulled back a bit because, you know, the movie, at this point, with all the fear of not having his powers and all that, it gets to a dark place, and you really feel it, and it's working. It's working to the benefit of the movie, because everything up to this point, like I said, when it committed to a genre, it committed to that genre, and it nailed it. But because it committed and nailed this Western, serious, end of the movie genre tone, once it got that silly, I just didn't. I was like, bro, like, no, you know. And it's, you know, it is an early filmmaker's movie. Like, you know, it is very well made, but dang, man, like I said, I love Blank Man. When you look at Blank Man, like, you know, yeah, neither one of these guys is based on a comic book, but you can see the production quality of Blank Man is very clean. There's a perfect control of tone and genre meshing like that. A really experienced hand handled Blank Man. But so that's just my point to why that scene is great. Like, again, they're committing to something. They are nailing it. It is great, but it's not right for this point in the movie, because it really took away from the mood they got me in, which is like, oh, it's going down. And then literally, and what really kills is, as soon as the dance moment's over, the bad guy punches him, and they're right back into that serious mode again. And I feel like you could have just erased the entire goofy section of the movie, of this finale, and I would have had a really satisfying finale. because the movie is that serious up front. And I feel like, it's not even tragedy because it's still a great movie. But it is just like, oh, like that is so 90s. You could do that in the 90s. You can't even do that today. You can't even do that today in a movie. People like, oh, God, come on. After Spider-Man 3, they'll never let you do it in a movie again. Never again, unless it's a comedy. No offense, Sam Raimi and that team, but yeah, they'll never, no. So Meteor Man and Spider-Man 3 have only one thing in common, and that's just that modeling and dancing do not support these movies. But other than that, Meteor Man was a great movie, and I highly recommend it for your viewing pleasure. Yeah, so that's what I had to say about Meteor Man, why it's great. That's my wiggy gut reaction to it. Yeah. I don't have a wig. That's not true. All right, let's see if I can get back home. Stop! Stop!